So I'm Coach Mark in Pittsburgh, and we're welcoming everybody to the UCSSC presentation here at WAFSU.org, the World Aquatic Federation of Schools and Universities. And our presenter comes from Australia. And it is a pleasure to welcome you back to the stage, Sander. He is an expert in swim coach. You're coaching a pro group, I believe, and it's a team in Australia. And I'm just going to give the floor to you and welcome everybody. And the show is yours, Sander. Take as much time as you need. And if anybody has questions or comments along the way, feel free to use the chat button. And you can even introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from. It'll give us a little more context.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for setting everything up. Yes, my name is Sander Ganzevles. I am indeed a swim coach currently in Australia, originally from the Netherlands. That's also on my first slide, really, so I'll just open them up. Like Mark said, if you have any questions during the speech, anything that you are wondering about, please feel free to ask immediately. And seeing as we have a certain amount of people around, I'll make sure that I'll get to that question as soon as possible. So whatever it is about, whatever it's on, if it's in my power to answer, I will answer it. According to Mark, we have plenty of time. So I'll just go through everything that I've cooked up really slowly. And hopefully everything is as clear as I can make it. Quick introduction. I've done that previously, but I'll do it again. I'm a former international swimmer for the Netherlands. So I did my professional swimming career in the Netherlands up till about 2004 when I just missed out on the Olympics. And then was done with training very, very hard and not making the team. And then I gradually moved into coaching. I coached different high performance centers, first in the Netherlands, then in Germany, and the last couple of years I've been in Australia. At the moment in Newcastle, where I coach a high performance center. It is sort of a professional team, more or less people who are full-time working on swimming. They are doing some other jobs and university schooling around that. I'm also a sports scientist. I used to work as an embedded scientist for the Dutch Federation before I moved to coaching. I got my Ph.D. in human movement sciences, specialized in the boundaries between biomechanics and physiology. And I recently started my own business with some coach mentoring and consultancy. So I've been very busy. And I think I have a good idea of what we are going to talk about. And specifically, we're going to talk about periodization. Periodization, there's a couple of things that I would like to discuss. First of all, what is periodization by itself? And then gradually, I'm going to explain more about supercompensation model, the different periodization models. Going to break it down in overviewable parts so that it makes it a bit more easier to at least get some periodization done. And then go further into a more practical example with a rationale, the considerations that I had in building a periodization that I currently work with, and how that periodization then exactly was built up. I had a bit of a thought process going on when I started preparing for this session. There's different things that people should be aware of, and one of them is the level that you are coaching at the moment, and the specific swimmers that you are coaching at the moment. So I've had the luxury of working with open water swimmers who actually did win the Olympics, but I also currently very much work with again, a swimmer that is going for a 50 meter, and that creates a big difference where, well, you have to attune your periodization to. So I'll talk about my current periodization, where I work with a swimmer that is more focused on the 50 meter. However, there is also some information about a swimmer that's more towards a 400 IM. So I'll mix that a bit throughout. Those are both swimmers in my program currently. And both have the idea or the goal to swim internationally. One is already doing that for New Zealand, and the other is aiming to do so for Australia. So I'll hopefully get some interesting information out. And again, like I said before, if there is any question, please feel free to ask them whenever. First of all, I think the main question is, what is periodization before we start talking about it? In my words, or in my opinion, it's a structured approach to training where we break down a certain period of time, usually a season, sometimes also multiple years. With one of the swimmers, I'm working more on a season based. For the other, we're working towards qualifying for the 2028 Olympics in LA. And what we're doing is optimizing the performance with different factors, taking different factors in account. And those factors are very important. I think very often people forget that it's not just the training and the stress of the training itself or the stimuli of the training itself. What's even more important is that we adapt. Everything else is not important. We need to get better, and that means that adaptation is crucial. Often that is forgotten, and very important to that adaptation is that we have a recovery process. If we don't recover, I believe they go hand in hand. And I'll talk a bit about that. I haven't really written that down in my slides. But when we go into the supercompensation model in the next bit, I'll talk a bit more about the adaptation and the recovery and how important it is to focus on that. What periodization further does is, I think, make the life of a coach way easier and interesting, and sometimes also more challenging, because we're looking at organizing training into phases. So we have a breakdown of a complete season in different parts, and those different parts have specific goals, they have different focuses, and that makes your season a bit more overviewable. And at the same time, I feel like you as a coach, and we as coaches, need to challenge ourselves to find the best way to deal with the specific goals and focuses that we set up for that period that we're in. Periodization, the first little bit that we need to understand before we come to anything about periodization is the background of the periodization. And periodization in itself, when it was first described in mostly the former Soviet Union, is based on the supercompensation model. And the supercompensation model, as a swimming coach, hopefully you've seen that before, but we can always be reminded of it, everything. It starts with a base level. That's where we're at right now. Then we start training, and then usually our level drops. So because of fatigue, because of exhaustion, we reduce the level that we can have, the fitness level. And you see that here in the red point, that where training is described. So they're slightly pink on my screen. Soon as training starts, we'll start getting fatigued. We'll start getting more exhausted. We're losing energy, which means our base fitness level drops. When we stop the training, from the moment we finish, get out of the water, get under the shower, our recovery system starts. And that recovery takes a certain amount of time. And if we do that well, we'll also see that there will be some sort of overshooting bit over here. Hopefully you can see my pointer. We call that part the supercompensation. If we do everything correctly, after hand in hand with the recovery, we will have the supercompensation. But if we do not train again, over time, the supercompensation will diminish and we'll get back to the base level of training where we were before we started the training session. Now, there is something interesting happening because what we want is basically that supercompensation compared to what we had before the training. We want to have our level go up. That's why we train. And we do see that happen, and I think everyone has seen that happen. We train, give the person a little bit of rest. That could be the time in between the morning session and the evening session or the next day, and very often people get better over time. Now, the interesting part is, and that's something to think about, is that recovery and that supercompensation are never separate, but they are slightly different. So they go hand in hand. There's quite a bit of research being done, especially the work of Viru is interesting in that point, is that recovery and adaptation cannot be separated. We need a certain recovery time to have our adaptation take place. And adaptation, again, is the thing that we are interested in. In the end, it doesn't really matter if the swimmer recovers as long as they adapt. But of course, we know that for adaptation to take place, we do need that recovery. If you were to take that recovery away, that's my opinion, so this is not completely agreed on in the scientific world or in the coaching world, but most scientists actually point to this idea, is that when we take the recovery away, we will not have the same level of adaptation or supercompensation. Actually, we'll have a diminished supercompensation or adaptation. It's more not something that I want to have you copy one-on-one what I'm saying, but I'd like to have you think about it. Very often I see a lot of people working on speeding up recovery, and there are points in time when that's very important, for example, between races at a big meet. However, in the training process, very often it's interesting, or it's an interesting idea that we can prolong the recovery to ensure more adaptation, or at least let recovery take its place to make sure that the adaptation is there. Because to have that adaptation, there's different mechanisms or different markers in our body. For example, creatine kinases. We know that if we have a certain level of that, it will lead to our muscles adapting and being able to become stronger. So recovery and adaptation, in my opinion, go hand in hand. In the end, what we're looking for is that point of supercompensation where we actually get better. Now, of course, when we are training, we're not just doing one training at a time. We're doing multiple training sessions, one after the other, and they should be well balanced. Why? Well, for one thing, there's multiple processes in the body, and we know, again, from research that they all have different time spans. So, for example, the phosphocreatine cycle in the body goes relatively quick. When we want to recover from that, usually we have about 3 minutes and we're back to full recovery. However, if we, for example, deplete glycogen completely, we'll have a 48 to 72 8-hour time frame what we're looking at for our recovery and adaptation. So every process that we're working on and every process that we're steering on has a different time frame, and we don't know exactly when all those time frames are. So we need to be very thoughtful and mindful of those systems and make sure that we plan our next session carefully. Why? It's in the next slide. Sorry, that should be in the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, that's in the next slide. Because we can have a positive line of supercompensation, but we can also have a negative line of supercompensation, or a line where we basically stay at the same level. When we look at the graph A with the green line, we see supercompensation positive. So gradually over time, we have a up in our fitness level. If we time our next session carefully and at the right time, it should again lead first to a diminished fitness level. But then after recovery and adaptation, we should overshoot our previous supercompensation. And that way we can gradually build up our fitness level or our performance level. On the other end, if we start our training session too early and we do not have full recovery of adaptation, we will have a negative supercompensation. And that often then leads to overtraining. So if we constantly put too much load on the swimmer, gradually over time, it will lead to a diminished performance, and overtraining is very close at hand. Now you can recover from that if you have your I'm getting a text from Dennis. Sorry to see that you having a typhoon there, Dennis. So hopefully you are safe and healthy, and all your loved ones are healthy and safe as well. I hope that you can see as much of it as you can from this presentation, and I know that Mark is recording it, so you can always look back. Back to my supercompensation graphs. The red line is something we do not normally aim for, but in some cases, especially when people are really well trained, we might use this line of training to then let it follow by a certain amount of recovery and make sure that we actually recover and get better, and actually overshoot where we were before. That's more for the better trained individual. The other useless situation would be where we always train after the supercompensation is diminished again, and that leads us to basically a null line where we stay at the same level without really a training effect. On the green line, some of you might have heard that, to make sure that we have that, and this is closely connected to the term that's called progressive overload. I'm not going to handle that too much. That's more the training's physiology, but it basically states that the further along we get, the more we need to do to get an extra step. Gradually, we're building up the loads, and basically we're gradually adding a little bit more in. It's very closely connected to that positive supercompensation model, and it might be interesting to have a look at that and connect the two. What these graphs tell us is we need to plan our next session carefully and smart so that we can have that green line. That means planning, and planning is closely related to periodization. So to ensure that we get to this point, we need periodization. Periodization then comes in a lot of different forms. There is the old school classic linear periodization. There are block periodizations. There is an undulating or non-linear periodization, and it's already, I want to say recent, but it's already the last 10 years or maybe even longer than that, that in swimming reverse periodization has become really interesting. What we're going to do now is we're going to go step by step through each of those concepts, and then also have a bit of a look at which one might be preferable. Although I must admit, again, it really depends on your situation that you have at hand, how many swimmers you have in the pool, what age the swimmers are, what other support you have. In my case, with the program that I'm leading, I have a sports scientist on deck, I have a physiotherapist on deck, and I have a S&C coach helping me out. I have different software and different sensors that I use to keep me in track, and that helps me get into a bit more of a creative, non-linear periodization, as we will see later on. So we'll start with the classic first one. This is linear periodization, where basically we start with a relatively high volume, high amount of reps, high amount of sets, high amount of meters. Intensity usually at the start of the season is very low. And the specificity of training is also relatively low. Usually it's divided in 3 parts, where we have a general physical training and a sport-specific training that's more focused on the actual event that swimmers are doing, and then gradually we move into a competition. As you can see there is a gradual decline of volume, but at the same time there is a gradual incline of intensity. So we're getting shorter volumes while the intensity gets high. Usually that coincides with more training specificity, and with more training specificity we mean going more into the swim stroke itself, doing more swimming by itself. So very often at the start of the season you can see here that people are running and cycling and doing other sports, making sure that they get, again, a lot of volume in, and then gradually move more towards swimming. At the same time, you can also see that the swimming goes more towards the actual race pace, so the pace at which swimmers need to perform. In that sense, it also gets more specificity. This is the old school way of working. First ways of periodization was very much focused on this type of work, still being done all around the world with very levels of success. There's definitely still some Olympic champions working more or less according to this concept. But other Olympic swimmers or medalists work more according to this one, which is called block periodization. With block periodization, we choose very definitive, very clear blocks in which we work on specific things. What you can see here is more of a old school block periodization, where first we work on accumulation. What that means is we have relatively high volume, low intensity. Then we have a block where we go into a intermediate level where we have both intensity and volume. And then finally, it's called the realization period, where we work very race specific. Now, what the difference is with the linear periodization is that it's really sharp levels of change, or where there is a gradual increase or decrease. In the linear periodization, here it's more of a step mechanism. So we step with a high volume, low intensity, over to a lower in volume and higher in intensity. And then at the same time, in the last block, we again make a step. So it's not that linear, there's clear steps, almost like a staircase. Usually there's some transition weeks in between. You see here the more physiologically focused, but this can also happen in phases where there is, for example, with an IM swimmer, a block where they work on fly and fly technique, and then the next block is backstroke and backstroke technique, and the next block is breaststroke and breaststroke technique, and they move in like that stepwise to really focus on the strokes. So there's different ways of handling that block periodization. The next step then is a more undulating periodization model, and this is, in my opinion, what most elite swimmers do, more or less. That has to do with multiple things. One, it's the planning itself, the periodization, but often you'll also have swimmers throughout a year that get sick, injured, have relationship problems, their pet goldfish might die, and that has an impact on the training, and that leads to not doing exactly what is happening or what is planned, which leads to variation. And I think personally that the variation is very interesting because usually variation leads to better learning. Um, in this case, this is all based off fitness training. We have an undulating periodization model, which is almost like a waveform or a sinus. So we start relatively high repetitions, lower, in this case, lower intensity, and gradually we move up in intensity while we move down in volume. And then we have again a periodization or transition week. Could be an adaptation week, some people call it. And then again, we go higher up in the volume and we go down again. Now, what you often see in swimming or is more a week where the intensities go up and the volumes stay the same, or the volumes go up throughout that period. Um, the total stress level is often an interesting marker. Um, I'll talk about that later again, but that waveform is what we call the undulating periodization model. So say you have a week where you go at level 1, then a week at level 2, then a week at level 3, then you have an intermediate week, and then again in the next week you start at level 1, then level 2, and then level 3. And gradually throughout the year you're keeping that sine wave going, making sure that you have a nice undulating pattern. The next one is the reverse periodization. I used a graph where we first have that classic linear periodization, where we start with a high volume and a lower intensity, and then gradually build up the intensity while decreasing the volume. The reverse periodization is exactly the opposite, where we start already with a high intensity and lower volume, and usually, or the old school idea there is that we gradually up the volume while we reduce the intensity. Now, what you often see in periodizations with different swim squads is that, yes, they start with high intensity and low volume, but then they keep that intensity relatively high while they gradually increase the volume. So it's basically a bit of a mixed model of the classic linear periodization and reverse periodization. Could not find a real nice graph for that when I was preparing, but you will see that those different forms happen, and that again, coaches get creative and they look for the best way to coach their swimmers, and their coach works right in front of them. But it's a good one to play around with, and I think the lesson that we learned from reverse periodization when it first came around is that it is very important that throughout the year we keep a certain level of intensity up, and a certain level of velocities especially up, that swimmers maintain that velocity or learn to swim at higher velocities. So I don't think there's that many people still working with the classic linear periodization. You very often see quite an amount of high intensity throughout the year. When we can break it down, and this is an important part to make your periodization overviewable, because just that line that we just drew for the linear periodization is not just enough. I believe you need to make it sure that everyone can understand your planning and that you can work with it on a daily basis. So that's why we break our periodization down in different cycles, different levels of cycles. We usually work with 3. It's the macro cycle, the mesocycle, the microcycle. The microcycle describes the broader season often, or an Olympiad. So that's a period of 4 years. What they do is they aim for the main competition over a period of 4 years. That's usually the Olympics. In a normal season, that's the benchmark event. In my case, that's Olympic trials or world trials, or this year Commonwealth trials here in Australia. And for my New Zealand swimmer, it is the actual Commonwealth Games that we aim for. The microcycles often also give an idea about the overall training emphasis. So what are the technical focuses, what are the biological focuses, what are the physiological focuses, psychological focuses, what do we need to do in the gym? Usually that's all described in that macro cycle. That microcycle is a 12-month period. Let's keep that relatively simple. And then usually to work with that on a daily basis, we break that again down into a bit shorter bit. And those are called the mesocycles. So usually are the periods or the phases within a year that we go through. Some people work with a month. Some people work with 4 weeks. I also know a good colleague from myself here, Chris Mooney. He coaches at the Bond University. He works with a 21-day roster where they have 17 days of relatively intense training, 4 days completely off. So again, there's a lot of variations possible there. When I was working in Germany, they were working with blocks of 12 to 16 weeks. But again, you can call that a mesocycle. That's basically up to you, but it breaks the season down into clear training, clear phases of a specific training focus. Very often you hear in swimming things like general prep, specific prep, pre-competition, and then taper and competition itself. I don't not work personally with those things myself, but it is something that comes back very often. So when you hear it, you have a bit of an idea. Usually that general preparation starts with more slower work and aerobic work. Some people choose to specifically focus on technique weaknesses in that period, also on skills. Skills meaning starts, turns, finishes, and underwater phase very often. Then you'll have more specific prep where they start getting some race pace work in, some anaerobic capacity work, so 50s or 25s really fast with quite a bit of rest. Starts and turns often come back, and then gradually that leads into more what we call aerobic and anaerobic power, where they work more on holding that certain pace that they trained for a certain time, to then lead into the taper with rest and prep for the race. Again, there's different ways of working. Can't stress that enough. Not everything is clear for everyone, and not everyone will have the same periodization. But it's good to know all the different levels that there are. And it's good to know the different wording and the different forms that people talk about. The next step is the microcycle. Microcycle is the shortest bit or the smallest bit that you can call a cycle, which is not yet the training itself. Often it's a week or half a week that people work with. It's how the training load and the recovery is distributed across the week. So there's different ways of doing that. But you often see there is in swimming, there's harder sessions and easier sessions. There is a weekly rhythm. I personally work with a 2-1-2-1-2-1 rhythm, which means 2 sessions on Monday, 1 session on Tuesday, 2 sessions on Wednesday, 1 session on Thursday, 2 on Friday, and again 1 on Saturday. And that already again creates that waveform, that sinus. And that sinus allows for stress or training, and also allows for recovery. So because of that balance throughout the week, there is room for recovery in my program. Have I said already that recovery is very important? Recovery is very important for that adaptation to take place. So I do like to build in the recovery in my weekly plan. So again, macrocycles lead to mesocycles, lead to microcycles. Often what we do as coaches is we start with what's in front of us. And that's, first of all, we have to have a race or a previous performance. I had a video here, but I couldn't send that over. And I showed that video the last time I spoke here. I thought that was a nice connection between the two presentations. We need the race, and we need the race to determine what a swimmer needs and what a swimmer is looking for and how a swimmer can improve. What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? And what are the things that we can do to make the swimmer better? So what I do is I watch the race and find out what needs to be better. Often that is something like efficiency, how many strokes a swimmer does, or what stroke rate the swimmer swims with. I look at the turns, the starts. We do a full race analysis of that race, and then we can get all the different parts that we find interesting. That then goes into a evaluation. We evaluate what went well and what needs to be better. What did we do to get there? There's set goals, what to maintain and what to improve. And there's a plan how to reach those goals and which cycles we do. So again, we look at that swimmer, we look at that race, and from that race, we determine, all right, this is what we did to get there. That had this as a consequence. That is the race. What can we now do? What can we do to make it better? What did we miss maybe in the last year? And what are the things we did really well? And then we can use that to bring up our next season. We also need to have an idea what we're working towards. So that's why it's very important to set those goals. Not just the racing goal, as in, I don't know, to make the 53 to the Commonwealth Games next year, we need a 21.9 on the 50. What do we need to do to get there? What do we need to improve? But also, again, what did we do really well last year to have a half a second PB on a 50? What did we do to get that PB? What were the good parts? What can we do to change that up a little bit? The next part then is, all right, how can we reach those goals? And that's where, again, where the periodization comes into play. We have different cycles, we have different parts, we have different things that we can do to achieve those goals. Now I think, Mark, that I need to send you something else. Oh, not yet, but I will send you something else. If you can find a way to load that up, that would be highly appreciated. I'll just make sure that Mark has another document. We're just going to use that because we have some extra time today.
Sure. I'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, it's coming up in a little bit. I'm just going to push save here. So I have cleared the swimmer data and specifics. Just need to make sure that that we can't trace it back to the swimmer, Mark. And if you can then load it, that would be good. It's a Word document, so hopefully we can get through that as well. So first, from the evaluation, there's different considerations that we need to put into play, that we need to think of before we actually make that plan. In my opinion, let me rephrase that. Technique is one of the key factors in swimming. It is maybe the key factor. There's relatively recently David Pine with one of his colleagues. I think his name is Zaka from Portugal. They've published a nice scientific article where they show that about 80% of the performance of a swimmer is determined by technique. So we have to plan for technique to be in our periodization. In my opinion, needs to be year round because there's never a moment to get slack. There's always a high focus on technique. The next part is race-based training. I find it very important throughout the year. I think it's very important for especially the modern sprint and mid-distance events. I think a lot of you will have seen Ken McAvoy do a lot of interesting things. And one of the things he definitely does do is that he has continuously throughout the year pace and fast work in his system. There's never a session that he does only slow stuff. I think it needs to be there, race-based training. I also think it can be overdone. So again, that comes to the point that you have to be smart in how you balance all the things that you want to train, but make sure there is a place for race-based training. The third one is the skills. Again, if you have watched the last World Championships, last week I was in New Zealand for short course championships over there. The importance of starts and turns, and especially on the waters, is just increasing and increasing. Historically, it's always been prioritized more closer to the competition, but I believe that we need to do it the whole year through. So there should be specific focus on starts, turns, underwaters. It might be in specific phases, but make sure again that the work that you want to do on them is in your periodization. Similar on dry land, just as much as the swim training, you have to adapt your dry land sessions. Often again, that's heavier earlier season, could be tailored later. Different ways of working. That is more or less what I do. We start with usually quite a heavy load of gym work, high load as in quite a number of sets, quite a number of repetitions, and then gradually we move more to what we call more power exercises, where we throw balls, we jump, we slam, we make sure that the power of the exercise, of the speed with which they do the exercises, goes up. The final consideration, and it's a very individual one, is the taper. Generally lasts 1 to 3 weeks. It's a period of reduced volume while we still maintain the intensity. And often people start working on skills. I think, again, that if you only work skills in the taper, you're too late and you won't get it automatic in the system. So you have to make sure that those skills are in there the whole year through. But taper is a period where you have a bit more time, where they are spending less time training and swimming up and down. So it might be a good time to do a bit of extra work on the skills. We go over to the next part, and now hopefully, yes. Could you bring up that other document I sent, Mark? Hopefully you have it.
Yes, at the bottom of the widgets, there's the PDF broken into 3 parts or the PDF.
All right, let's have a look. Yes. All right.
So number 24, 25, 26.
24. Right. Yeah, I see it. Let's see. I pushed the wrong one. There we go. All right. So back to that evaluation. What I do before I start working on my periodization is that for each swimmer, I create what I call a performance profile. starts with the name and the date of birth, but I blanked that out on this one. We find what we're looking for. So we set up the goals, we get the current situation. We also look at how much improvement there was over the last year. We look at how much improvement we need to make to get to this specific point. And that creates the blueprint. We then look at the last races that have been done. In this case, this is a swimmer who swims in his last race. He wasn't very good. He swam at 23:26. We break it down into different parts. There's a start, there's a finish, there's the different rates, there's the counts of kicks and strokes, there's the different splits. We also get that from his PB, which was swam at his peak meet. So we did well last year in getting the PB done at the peak of the season. The last race was not the peak of the season. And we see that the start, finish especially, is a bit faster. The rates are different. He's holding his rates better. He's one stroke less, and the splits are generally just a little bit faster. We use those race analysis parts to then come up with points of improvement. I made a whole list. There's information about starts and finishes. There's information about physiology. We saw for this particular swimmer that when we measured starts in training, that they generally can be a bit faster than in the race. So obviously something in the transfer there is going wrong, something we need to work on. We see that he loses velocity or loses compared to his competitors in the underwater phase. And he usually is a bit higher in his strokes than the international standard. So the international standard differs. This is a particular swimmer. He's quite tall, so he has a long arm width and long span, which means we need to work on getting his efficiency up a little bit. We're aiming this year to get his 50 done with 37 strokes. There's specific things about the technique that he then needs to do. There's specific things in the S&C, so in the gym, that he needs to do. And our physiotherapist hinted at certain things that we need to do better. So there's, for example, left shoulder tightness, where we know, all right, if we increase the mobility there, he will be less tight. If we need to increase the mobility, we consistently have to work certain exercises in the gym to make sure that he gets better. This then leads to the next bit, which is per discipline that I work with or that I work on, there's an outlay of what we need to do. So we have physiology, biomechanics, we have the skills. Biomechanics, I usually focus more on the technique itself, and the skills is more, again, the start, the turn, the underwater phase. We have the strength and conditioning. On the next slide, there's also a bit of a part on nutrition, psychology, and all those things have to have a place in your periodization, in your season plan, in your way that you work for your swimmer. Now, again, I have the luxury of working with 10 swimmers who are more or less professional athletes. That's my main job. So I have quite a bit of time to work with them and to come up with this plan for everyone. I also have worked in a club situation here in Australia, and I had about 110 swimmers that we were responsible for as a coaching team. But we still made these performance profiles, not as extensive as it is done for this one. But we knew for most swimmers what their goal was, what their weaknesses were, and how we needed to get there. All those weaknesses, often you see similar characteristics. So that's the stuff that you would want to work on in a club setting. For this particular swimmer, in the luxury case that I have, the high performance center, we determined that we need to work anaerobic and aerobic capacity. He's quite good on that anaerobically, not so good aerobically. And where he struggles with is breaking through pain. So he often chickens out when we do 450s. He would do, and I think this is very familiar for a lot of swim coaches, he would often do 3 okay, and then the last one really fast. So I needed to come up with different sets where that would no longer happen. So for example, in his case, I have weeks where I build in without him knowing surprise sets. So we have um, um, for example, we do a 50 fast. We go as fast as possible. And then I surprise him with another 50 afterwards, or a 25, or even 100. And that way he learns that he can do that and that he can get on the block. But it's something that you need to plan into your sessions. We work on skills. We saw that his transfer was difficult, like I said before. So there's a little section on that. There's some section on the biomechanics. And what you will also see is that I have regular testing. And that regular testing is, in my philosophy, an important one. Every 4 weeks or 8 weeks, we have a certain amount of tests that we go through. They are different per swimmer, but they're all scientifically founded. We look at what we can do to get the best grip on our system. So we want to see improvement in those tests over time. If the swimmer is not improving for that one reason or the other, we can figure that out and we can get a hold on that. So there's different tests. There's the tests for more anaerobic capacity, and usually we get the critical speed from that as well. There is a max speed test. There is tests for biomechanics. So we have the EO Swim Better device with which we can measure the swimmer's propulsive power on the water. We look at video cameras, of course, or at video footage, of course, a lot every week. And we do quite a bit of work with the destro towers. So that's a power rack, some added resistance that we swim against. And I use that as a test mechanism as well. So we put a known weight in it, and we see how fast the swimmer can kick at 25, pull 25, and swim 25. So there's different tests that we do, and they are recurring. They are the same. They are the same layout. They have the same warm up. They have the same moment of the week. And that way we can get a good idea of how the swimmer is performing. Little section here on nutrition and psychology. Psychologically, this guy is pretty sound. However, we did determine that it would be good to stay more focused before races, more relaxed before races. So we're setting him up to have a mental coach working with him throughout the next season. Right. So that's a document. That's my blueprint, my first thing that I use to get into my periodization. So that is taking these considerations into account, taking the evaluation into account, and then we move over to the real work of periodization. So I target specific areas. Personally, I work with 3 to 4 weeks. We build up for 3 weeks, and we work on adaptation for 1 week. So what I'm doing right now in this part of a presentation, I'm going a bit more into the specifics of my own program, whereas before I was a bit more generic. I build up sort of different blocks. They usually last 3 to 4 weeks. You can see a little bit on the right here. It's not necessarily the volume. It's not necessarily the intensity. It's a combination factor, what we call the stress factor. And it's calculated basically with the Commit swimming software. but it's a multiplication of the distance that we swim and the intensity with which we swim. So you see a build up there. We start at 80, 100, 120. We go to 70, and then 90, 110, and 130. So gradually intend to build up that stress level. Like I said before, I have testing every 8 weeks, and my periods are very targeted. So I have a themed period. That leads to both an undulating periodization combined with some sort of a block period. So what I use that block part for is to very specifically target areas that I want to work on. And that can be very psychologically. It can also be more, in this case, I have 4 examples there. I work with a month that we just are finishing up. That's kick timber. So we do a lot of kick instead of our normal 15% of kick throughout the week. We reach up to 30 or even 40% of kick. I usually find that my swimmers need fare really well on that. But if I take that longer than 4 weeks, it gets boring. So with 4 weeks of kick, a lot of kick, I get a really good buy-in. That's why I work with that period of kick timber. Kick timber then flows into Rocktober. That's something I basically stole one-on-one from Eddie, from the famous Eddie Reese. I work in that period with lots of drag, but I'm also looking at efficiency. So trying to reduce the stroke count while maintaining the speed or maintaining the same lap time, or decreasing the lap time, so getting faster while we maintain the same strokes. So that's usually one of the toughest periods of my season, where they get really slow at the end because they're just really tired. And what I then do is I start speeding things up towards what in Australia is an important meet. That is the state championships in December. So in the month of November, I speed things up. So we go from a lot of drag to actually assisted swimming. So with a cord or with zoomers or with fins. And gradually we get faster like that. And then finally in this little part, there is the Racember, which is the month where we taper and then race. So I work with those names, and you'll also see that throughout my season that I keep having the same idea with blocks of 3 to 4 weeks, followed by a recovery / a test week, and gradually building it up. So I'm going to take you through this, and it will be quite detailed. January, where we normally tend to do quite a bit of volume, but still combined with intensity. So we're working on aerobic capacity here. You can see that in the focus column. Skills are usually focused on underwater in those 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And you can see here that intensity is going up 1, 2, 3. So that's that stress level I was talking about. In this next column, I usually write down all the meets that we do. And sometimes I have some comments. For example, in week 4 of the last season, they had the Saturday morning off. I was such a nice coach because they could sleep in that day. Other stuff that happens, we do clinics, there's people away, there's university starts back up, and there's holidays here where I also need to be aware of, because that sometimes means that I have less pool space or that swimmers are away. So there's quite a bit in this document. I usually work with 3 different phases throughout the year. This is more of a capacity. Phase is usually yellow. When we then work more on power, it turns into red. And the difference there is I follow more or less the Jan Olbrecht philosophy. I work with capacities where we work on allowing the body to have as much energy in either the aerobic or the anaerobic system as possible. And then that turns into power, where we try to release as much of that energy that we conserve. So what you can basically identify with is that in the yellow periods, we have a bit more rest in the anaerobic system and a bit more volume in the aerobic system. And then we go to the power periods, where we have less rest and higher intensities, both in the aerobic and the anaerobic system. So January, they're usually getting a bit tired and sometimes a little bit frustrated because the distances are a bit longer. Then we go into February, and that's almost a copy of October, where we do quite intense work with quite a bit of drag. We work in efficiency. We also start working on the start and the turns there. The intensities of the week are 2, 3, and 3. And last year we went on a training camp and combined that with intense training, and we went to Malaysia, to the beautiful pool in Johor. We rage in March, which means we go fast and we go in towards race pace and do more power work. And then our first benchmark of the year for a lot of people was Australian Age Championships. That's where they can qualify in Australia for Junior Worlds or Junior Pan Packs, any of the benchmark junior events. Most of my swimmers, however, went over to the trials in Adelaide or the trials in New Zealand, which means that I have to balance quite a bit of plannings in my system. So this is my working document, where I have an overview of the whole year, my macro cycle. The benchmark events are really clearly defined. I know when there is a testing week. My whole support staff knows when there's testing weeks, so when they need to work a little bit harder. And that way we have a really good overview of the year. I then break every period down into what we call mesocycles. So the mesocycles are given here. So there's blocks of 3 to 4 weeks. And then those 3 to 4 weeks, they go into my next document, which is more the week plan. And you can see here again the different colors: the yellow for more capacity work, the red for more power work, and the blue where we do testing and sometimes also racing in this case. I define every session's content, not so much the volume, because I'm not always that interested in volume. I keep track on volume, as I will show you later on in the next slides. My main focus is the swimmers need to know what they're up for. They need to know when they need to be fast. And usually that's clear when there is something like anaerobic capacity is something where they need to be fast. There's an anaerobic capacity session here. When it's sprint, we usually work more on phosphocreatine systems, so sprints that last up to 10 seconds. These are often combined with skill sessions where we work on starts and turns. So throughout that week, there is that flow. Again, there's that sine curve where we have easier sessions, especially on the Monday morning and the Thursday morning. We have harder sessions. We have sessions where we work more on sprints. We have sessions where we work more on aerobic capacity. That way we intend to balance the different systems and optimize that supercompensation curve for all the different sessions for all the different systems that we have. Again, that's a big puzzle. We aim to get the highest efficiency out of that whole system. You can see here, there's this testing set week. I haven't put all the tests in this time, this one, unfortunately. But we had, for example, a test here on Tuesday, 18th of March, where we also did some filming for a documentary on the EO Swim Better stuff. That's the way I work with my group. All the swimmers get this information before the start of a new period. They know when to do where to swim, what time they need to be there, and what we do in each session. So that's the periodization and planning part. So from this part come the separate sessions. I believe I spoke about that in the previous presentation. Those sessions, they then have, they should align with the periodization, but I should also be able to track that. So that's this next step, what I do. In my session, sorry, we go, I'm trying to load this one, it's not really loading. There we go. This is an overview of my whole season. Every session is written down in Commit Swimming, and Commit Swimming allows me to get an overview of the whole season. So what you'll see here on the top is the meters per week. You'll see weeks where there's 0 meters being swum. That's usually a holiday period. For this specific swimmer, I'm not sure if you can see that because I'm not sure if I have a clear marker there. But around here, the week of 5:26 and 6:09, and there's 2 zeros there, and then a 25.66. Its first 0 was when we did our trials in June in was it Brisbane? If we look further back, there is another 0 here. That's when we had our national championships here. There's a couple of weeks where this swimmer, this particular swimmer, was sick. There's also 2 weeks here where it was 0, where we did our break in the middle of the season. And then you can see that throughout that system, there's more or less that wave pattern. But it doesn't always go as planned. Like I said here, end of January and beginning sort of mid-February, this swimmer was sick. I think the first one was the flu and the second one was COVID. So different things. And that leads to this swimmer not being able to do the complete program, and we need to break things down a little bit. Commit is very handy because it also determines this stress level, so we know how high the stress level was. And again, you can see sort of that wave pattern coming back here again with the 2 weeks where there was way less swimming, and then that wave pattern leading here to first nationals and then trials. Also specification of the different stroke types, different intensities, and how much kick and pull we did throughout the season. The next slide is then a bit more zoomed in. This is our current season. So we just started our next season. Again, a nice wave pattern where we have 3 weeks build up, then a week less, and then a bit of a build up, a week less, a week build up. And this particular swimmer raced last week at the national championships in New Zealand. He went pretty fast there. I was quite happy with his performances. We had 1 week where he was a bit sick in the lead up, and then we build up, and then we started again with a build up, and then we started again with a little build up. You can see that as well again in the stress levels, and again the different strokes, the different types of swimming and the intensity. And you can also see here very clearly that we have different volumes throughout the days. Monday is usually a day where I start off relatively easy. And you can see that the Wednesday and the Friday are higher in load. That becomes even more clear when we go to the weekly plan. And the weekly plan shows 1 week. This was the week before we left for New Zealand. It was quite an intense week for this swimmer. And you can see here that we had a bit more distances and a bit more load on the Monday, the Wednesday, and the Friday. Tuesday and Thursday were one-off sessions, and Saturday was a session where we did quite a bit of sprint work and efficiency work, so the volume was less. So what I do here, and I think this again makes it very clear, I have that combination of block periodization where I work very targeted on specific areas like the kick, like efficiency, and those stem from that performance profile, which I've shown you as well. From that come the blocks with specific focus points, but within the blocks, I still have that undulating motion. And my end philosophy there is that most processes in nature work in a sine motion, ebb and tide. The periodized or the supercompensation itself is more or less a sine wave. I believe that is the way that we can get the most out of our swimmers. So we balance recovery with, we balance the training sessions or the stress of the training sessions with recovery. But again, the main focus there is adaptation to make the swimmers indeed better. That's why I have that sine wave to balance recovery and stress in order to get the maximal adaptation possible. All right. That leads me to the last slide with some of my contact details. So if you ever feel like you want to reach out, have questions, want to discuss swimming with me, then these are the ways that you can find me. Happy to discuss. I'm also more than happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point in time.
Hey, Coach, I do have some questions. Wonderful presentation. So how much weight or vision do you have retrospectively, in a sense that you're working this year? Do you look back to last year and the year before? Do you have some benchmarks? So how do you try to repeat what happened well in the past?
Yes, so yes, I do look back quite a bit. I have my stack of coaching logbooks, which now dates back 15 years. So I have been recording almost every session in my book and in my books, and I look back at what worked and I look back at what did not work. The commit software is very handy, as in it records every session, so I can look back at what we did last year, at the volumes, at the intensities, at all the different things. I have one very important parameter, and that's why I'm very happy with your question, which I completely forgot. Every session, I ask the swimmers about their session RPE and the feeling of the water. And that's also something that I record meticulously. The feeling of the water, or the feeling of that session. So the session RPE goes on in my book on a 1 to 10 scale. I use the Foster scale for that. 1 is a very easy session, and 10 was the hardest session that they could ever do, basically impossible to do. I get that from every session. And the second part is that feeling of how they went during that session. 1 was not very good, and 10 was really well. So you can have a really hard session going really well. You can also have a hard session that not went really well. What I then do with those numbers, I track them. And in the direct situation, usually if 3 times in a row the feeling is really bad, I need to adjust something. That's the direct effect. So that's on a shorter scale. When I look back at all that information that I have, I look at the things that went, or the periods that went well and the periods that didn't well, and I look at the patterns that arise in those sessions. And a very important one that I have is that before I ride a session, or when I ride a session, I determine, all right, this should be level 8, for example. If the swimmers then score level 6 or level 10, well, something was a little bit off, or even level 4. And the same with a recovery session. If it should not be a hard session, but a 3 or 4, they score way higher, I know something is up. However, very often there's a pattern in there that I might have missed once or twice. That happens. I'm pretty good at it, especially after quite a couple of years doing that. But I do miss some patterns where constantly they're 1 point above, for example. And those are the ones that you look back on in retrospect and you find, all right, this is where we did something wrong, where we were shooting too high, and then often lead to reduced performance. Other things that are really important. So you have your periodization, you have your beautiful plan with your nice sine curve. Like I just showed you, the particular swimmer that I showed you was the one, I think he might have performed the worst of everyone last year. In my group, the year before, he was one of the highest performers. He started living by himself, and all of a sudden he turned out to be way more sick, way more often. So I have those tools in place to look back, and that's actually, yeah, that is what I do. And I then figure out what was best and what did not work.
So those numbers that you asked of the athletes, are they recorded in commit also, or do you have another way? And how do they punch in those numbers on a laptop, or they just verbally put them to
No,
you?
they verbally give them to me, because I find that when there's all these fancy apps that you can use and they work relatively well, as in they do what you want them to do. However, I find that the inclination of the swimmers to fill in those simple questionnaires, because it's 2 numbers, is not always that high. So it's simple, and I like it actually for another reason as well. After each session, they walk past me before they go, and that gives me 2 options of two things. One, I get those numbers, and the second part is that I have a quick moment to talk with the swimmer, look them in the eyes, and determine, all right, how did you really go, and have some points of feedback. So I often ask them, do you have any feedback for me? What I observed in the session was this, and that. Of course, I have the luxury. I have 10 swimmers, so I can do that with 10 swimmers. It gets a little bit more difficult with 30 swimmers. But even when I had 30 swimmers, all the swimmers passed by me and gave me their numbers, and I then meticulously put them into Excel. And at the moment, more and more, it's turning into my good friend ChatGPT, that helps me in recording those numbers and graphs them out for me.
Economic question. So when you take the team from Newcastle to Adelaide or Newcastle to New Zealand, what's the dollar amount? How much does it cost? So those flights, I guess so. That got to be pretty expensive. How does that weigh into your team travel decisions?
Yeah. So, of course, the answer it's always too much. We have a crazy country here. I know you are in the US, and a lot of people are, I think, from the Philippines and from all over the world. But Australia is just really, really big, and the distances are ridiculous. So we fly. I just come back from New Zealand yesterday evening. That's a 3-hour flight, and Tuesday I'm flying to Melbourne to do that. Often swimmers here, it's a bit of a combination. So within my program, there is some little funding that they get. So it's almost a bit like scholarships, and a lot of that is paid for them. They paid by themselves, so they work to fund their swimming. The good news is that domestic flights are relatively affordable. So we usually fly over to Melbourne. I think I fly for Melbourne for $200 in Australian dollars. I do not know, unfortunately, what that is in US dollars at the moment. but $200, and then we find good accommodation, but affordable accommodation in the cities that we go in. One thing that we do to gather quite a bit more money is that we do clinics with my group, either in our own center or we go on to smaller centers in the state, and we gather a couple of $1,000s by doing clinics for younger kids.
Oh, that's good to be able to offset the prices.
Yeah.
So intensity by intensity.
Yeah.
You have a pie chart.
Yes.
A1 is seemingly the largest,
A1
but
is
there's a
seemingly
lot of other small slivers of pie. I see descending. What are some of those other pieces of the pie that you monitor?
All right, we go into energy zones basically now, and that's always a bit confusing because we have about 200 different systems, I think, about the globe to define our energy zones. I work with the Dutch system, which goes A0 for low, very much recovery swimming aerobic, which we almost do not do. A1 is still low intensity aerobic swimming. And then I have A2 and A3. A3, that's more or less maximum VO2 type swimming. What you see there in the pie chart is basically my idea of my philosophy is very much polarized swimming. So we do not do very much in the middle zones. We do go quite a bit fast. Historically, again, having worked in different countries, there's different ways of writing those things down. So you have your max, you have your sprint, you have your A3, there's descending work in there. There is one special thing that I only think is a Dutch thing, because no one else in the world has that word, but we call it lekker, Lekker. And it's a bit of a combination of things. Literally translation in English would be tasty or yummy, but tasty swimming might not refer to that much, but it's in our philosophy or in the Dutch way of working, we use lekker for food, but we also use it for the weather, for sitting in the sun, drinking a nice cold beverage. That could be a lekker moment. You can have a lekker swim as well. And with the lekker swim, we aim for a phase where we're in total control. We're fast, but we're doing our best swimming possible. And for everyone who has ever swum competitively, it's that moment you're not going all out, but you're just before that. Very often, that's how you swim your best races. If it's perfect control and you feel the best you can feel, you have a lot of pressure on your hands, you feel efficient, and we focused target that feeling. That's what we call lekker. So that's also one of the slivers of the pie.
Great. Some of the other abbreviations, UW probably means underwater.
Correct. Yeah.
And CAP is capacity, sort of
Yes.
threshold training, maybe.
No, that's below threshold in the Dutch booklet. Yeah.
Okay. And then PWR is power, I imagine.
Yeah. That's more towards threshold and above. Yeah.
The towers, pulling on the towers with heavy resistance, would that be a power category? Or do you have your own pipe?
Power focuses in that sense both to a more physiological idea and a more mechanical idea. The power in the with the towers and, for example, with chutes, with pedals and with fins, that usually focuses more on the mechanical part. But we work with in the power situation in the Netherlands. Again, this is more physiology background. we use the Albrecht system, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but it's a physiologist from Belgium who has done a lot of work, especially in Europe and also in Australia. Um, he works with capacities and power, and the best way to describe that, I don't have a whiteboard here. Usually, I do this explanation with a whiteboard, but imagine you have both for the aerobic and the anaerobic system. You have a kettle or a tank where you have a certain amount of energy. And what we do with capacity training is we want to increase the size of that tank. We want to make sure that we get more and more energy into that system. The more energy we have, the more energy we can use in a race. Now, very important in that, that energy also needs to get out of the system. And that's why at the top of that tank, hopefully you can see that and hopefully it's clear enough, we have a sort of an outlet. And that determines how many joules or how much energy per second or per time frame we can release. And that's what we call the power. So if you have a certain amount of tank, you have a really small outlet, you won't be able to release all that power during your race. In the other end, if we have a small tank and we have a huge outlet, we will unleash all the energy that we have immediately. So that's also something we don't want. So we have a capacity, that's the tank, and when we train the power, we train the outlet. And we want to optimize the outlet for the capacity that we have. So in that sense, capacity and power are different things. Uh, we work on enlarging the tank, and we work at the same time at optimizing the size of our power outlet. Does that make sense when I explain it like that?
I believe so. Russ, yes. A
Yeah.
couple other little questions. You had core, comma, MOB. Mobility would be the MOB.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's different types of dryland training. We or in my program we work with a multitude of dryland sessions, and again I have the luxury again of that performance team. So they're in every day before the session starts in the water. We have half an hour of dryland time, of which effectively we use about 20 minutes. And we work on different aspects of the body and making the body move better. So I'm a strong believer in having good mobility for swimming. I'm a strong believer in working on good movement patterns. So we work on yoga, we do different routines, we do a little bit of martial arts work in my program, and we have meditation mornings. So there's a number of dryland things that we do before each session.
All right. Then there was an initial IND, like individual. But does
Yes.
that mean like they're number one? I'm a butterfly, I'm doing butterfly, or if I'm an IMer, I'm doing IMs? What is the in?
So the individual, in this case, actually, is for the dryland sessions. So
Okay.
what we do before the session. I'll get to your other part of your question a little bit then as well. Dryland sessions, we have the luxury that we have a physiotherapist with us on deck twice per week or 2 days per week. And each swimmer has their own specific dryland program to work on his or her weaknesses. So they do in that specific dryland session, they do something specifically for them. And then usually in the other sessions, I'll take them through more of a group workout.
Oh,
Um, yeah, individually, every swimmer has their own uh, planning and periodization because they indeed are have everything from 50 freestylers to 400 IM and 200 butterflies and 200 backstrokers. So um, even within that group of 10, I usually have 5 different training sessions running at the same time to make sure that they all have their optimized program.
thanks for the explaining. I got a couple others. Tell me about the EO documentary. That got my interest going.
You saw that.
I did.
So I am good friends with the makers of that sensor. So there is a hand sensor. I have it here somewhere, actually. I'll grab it before I start. Keep talking. At least I think I have it. Yes, I do. Um, because of my background as a biomech and physiologist, I got in contact with a company in Sydney. And I'm not trying to sell these things, yeah, just to make
Well,
it
you can
clear.
sell all you want.
But we have these little hand sensors, and they go on the hand, more or less like this is actually the left hand, so more or less like that, a little bit further. And they have an interesting amount of sensory in there. So with this thing, we measure forces with a little hole here. You might be able to see that right in the middle of the O. There's a pressure sensor and there's another pressure sensor here on the hand. So this thing measures the differential pressure between that point and this point, which gives us an idea of how much force there is on the hand. In that little thing, there's also an accelerometer and a gyroscope, which allows us to determine exactly where the hand is, how fast the hand is moving, and what kind of trajectory the hand is moving through. So it's a nice little thing. And I've been fortunate to have a good relationship with the makers. So we've been beta testers from both basically the start. And yeah, this helps us optimize the swimming technique because we can very easily see flaws and things that can be better. And yeah, that EO documentary we starred in together with a number of famous coaches like Dr. Sorbo and let's see, Carl Chalmers was in there. We helped them out, and they helped us out. So we did a little film shooting on that morning that there was an EO documentary, which if you search for EO Swim Better, you'll be I'm sure you'll be able to find that documentary.
Yes, I think it could be on YouTube, right?
Yeah, it is on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we really appreciate you coming. It was excellent information, and this is an encore presentation on a different topic. But sometime maybe in the future, I'd love to hear all about your test sets.
Yeah.
We'll save that one. Or the other one might be, how you use video. I would love to just, unpack what you use for the video, what you're looking at, how you're setting up cameras, the whole technical part of, running video during practice or during meet. So I think that would be really interesting to know what's going on there. And then lastly, and then, my heart bleeds for all those lost goldfish and how many people are missing your practices because of a dead goldfish. You have
Yeah.
a sensitive spot in your soul for all sorts of accommodations.
Yeah. So shall we start with the video? We I have the luxury of working in high tech facilities. At the moment, I'm not very much in a high tech facility, so I talk you a bit through both. In the Netherlands, we had a beautiful pool in Eindhoven and also a really good pool in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, we had only 6 cameras built into the pool that we can use on a daily basis. And I think at the moment in Eindhoven, they have about 20 or 25 cameras installed. So every movement that you want to make, you can record in that sense. I then moved over to Cairns and Germany first, where we also had quite a bit of things installed. In Cairns, I used a system that's called the WinnerCam system, which is something that is built by people from the Netherlands again. So Eindhoven. And at the moment in Newcastle, I'm working with the GoPro and getting the finances together to get the win again. So I've been through the different phases and the different ways. In Amsterdam and Eindhoven, like I said, I think if you're a swim coach and you feel a bit touristy and want to see something of the world, I would recommend going to Eindhoven and viewing that center and see if you can get a nice tour of it. Because every centimeter of the stroke can be measured there with a 3D system where they place LED sensors on the hand, and yeah, every inch of the stroke can be measured. What we often did there is we did a start, and then the start was analyzed, and we could also overlay the fastest start or any start that we wanted really with the current start that they did. So we saw the trajectory of their fastest start and we could compare their current start. So that way we could uh, try something, change something of the technique, and immediately see if it had a good effect or not a good effect. That is an incredible and I think uncompared training tool that the Dutch have. Same for the turns, so that works really nicely. What we often did there for technique is relatively simple. We did a swim, you come out, you watch something, and you get direct feedback, and then you see if you can improve on that and see if you can do it better again. Another way that we did was we went, and basically that system I still use. So when I use the GoPro, we get the swimmers in the water, we video, get them out of the water, and we get the immediate feedback as quickly as possible, just using the GoPro Hero app. So that the basic idea there is the same. What I now start doing in Newcastle, so from going from the completely measured every centimeter to way less measured, what we now do is we combine multiple GoPros throughout the swimming session and start connecting them through different strokes. I work at the moment with the swimmers that I now have. Like I said, we record the video and they get out of the water, then they watch the video, they go back in the water and try to do it again. Another thing that I do is, and then I often go by it frame by frame. So I watch and pick out that one thing that we need to work on. We work on that for a while until we improve and get what we wanted. And then we step over to the next thing. When we have to find that first thing and it's sort of started to improve, I often switch over to live delay. So I have a GoPro camera that's connected to a little wire, which sends the signal of the GoPro outside of the water. So I can catch it with an iPad and then have live delay. So they swim, come out of the water, they quickly watch their video, and then they hop back in. The problem with the GoPro is that it's Wi-Fi transmitted, so it doesn't go through the water. So I had a company in Brisbane who usually observes boats, and they have a nice. The company is called Dunderpole, and they have a nice casing and aluminium pole where they place the GoPro in, but they connect a wire to the Wi-Fi transmitter from the GoPro, and that reaches out to above the swimming pool, so we can actually get the underwater footage while the camera is underwater, and we don't have to get it out. We can just do everything with our GoPro. So we get creative, and that works really well. You sound switched off.
Fabulous. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask?
With your program, Do you monitor also their food intake when it comes to a harder training? Do you have a measurement, exact measurement for the food intake for their nutrition with your athletes,
Um,
or do they have the particular coach that given them the right nutrition for the competition?
yes. So I indeed work with a nutritionist within our program, and she gives them the guidelines. So it's not that we exactly measure it, but we give them the guidelines. We expect after certain sessions a certain amount of protein intake. We expect them to have had food before they come in into the morning sessions. We do not completely exactly describe the food intake, um, simply because I don't know exactly what it should be. There is, to my knowledge, no exact measurement of the energy that will be spent in a session, because again, that differs per swimmer. Uh, that is highly individual. But we do give them very clear guidelines on what they need to eat, and when they need to eat, especially when they need to eat. And one of the things that had a huge impact in the sessions is that they started to eat within the sessions. So we have 2 hour sessions, almost all of them. And I noticed that at the start, every one of them was just drinking water. And gradually throughout that session, they kept up their hydration status, which also is a very important thing. So you have to keep that up. Um, but we gradually sort of performance decline throughout the 2 hours with a couple of the swimmers. And those were the ones who did not eat before the session. Those were the ones who did not eat during the session. So especially that during the session had a good impact on their performance throughout. Um, they do regularly, monthly, check in with the nutritionist and see where they are. If there's anything that we need to tweak, we do that. Um, so yeah, so yes and no, we have a good eye on what they eat, but we do not measure everything completely strictly. No.
Yes, coach. Thank you. With the intensive training, coach, during training, do they also use a what you call this, a power gel or anything with their performance to with that high intensive training? Do they
Um,
use power gel or no? Because
no, not really the
we as
power gel.
a marathoner, we are use power gel during our training.
Yeah, yeah. So the power gel, I know that that's quite a big thing in marathons, and it is
Yeah,
indeed also definitely a bigger thing in marathon swimming. When we had our when I was working with our 10K and especially our 25K swimmers in the Netherlands, 25K is a 5 hour
yeah,
effort. We did help them or get them into working with the power gels. The thing with power gels, what I find personally, um, because swimmers are horizontal, it leads more often to a bit of heartburn during the session because it's quite often very, very sugary and also a little bit sour. So I find that during the session, I think it's because they're horizontal, sort of know that it's because they're horizontal. They struggle a little bit more with that. So what we often have is a drink that has quite a bit of carbohydrates in it, but it's not that strong as a power gel.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay, coach. Thank you.
you're welcome, Joe.
I appreciate this, and I know we will record it, and it will be posted soon. And we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and thanks for being generous with your time and your expertise. Uh,
My pleasure.
wish you best with all the swimmers, and hopefully all those goldfish are very healthy for the rest of the season.
Yes, I pray for the goldfish that they stay healthy. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for
Thank,
everyone for attending.
Thank you, coach. We really appreciate your effort, your expertise
Cheers, mate.
also. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much.